The offseason is over, and now it's time for the Colts to make the tough choices as roster cuts loom early next week. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, what up? Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Visit underdogfantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code Locked On to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Welcome in, everybody. I am Jake Arthur. He is Zach Hicks. You know the two of us from horseshoehuddle.com. And you know what? Today, we're digesting everything that we have learned being boots on the ground around the Colts all spring, all summer, watching all 13 practices, all the snaps from the 3 preseason games. We're going to tell you who the biggest surprises / Cinderellas are, who could potentially make this roster, followed by some of the toughest choices the Colts are going to have to make, like some veterans that might get cut. And then we're going to follow that up with some outside players that the Colts probably should try and acquire if they become available through the waiver wire and free agency. So, Zach, this has been a really fun summer because new coaching staff, it kind of creates a clean slate for everybody. If you're an established veteran, then you have to have a lot of equity to practically become safe, so there's a lot of guys who it's what have you done for me lately, and that's going to create a lot of opportunities for these younger guys that has kind of rolled out the red carpet for some Cinderellas, we're calling them, guys who you barely knew anything about a month or two ago, but now you better get used to them because you're probably going to be seeing them on Sundays quite a bit. First and foremost, arguably our biggest winner of the summer has been cornerback Daryl Baker Jr., who has essentially become the top outside corner on the team.
Yeah, Daryl Baker Jr. is the best story from all of Colts training camp. Like, yes, don't get me wrong. We want to follow Anthony. We want to follow all these rookies. We want to follow a lot of these veteran players and what they're doing. And obviously Shaquille Leonard bouncing back from his injury. Those are great storylines to follow and stuff like that. But Daryl Baker Jr., a former undrafted free agent who wasn't even signed with the Colts last offseason. He signed with the Arizona Cardinals, spent the whole offseason with the Arizona Cardinals, didn't even play a defensive snap in their preseason games, gets cut from their roster. They don't even bring him back to the practice squad. The Colts bring him over to the practice squad. He spends a whole year in the system, just on that bottom end of the roster in the practice squad, getting those couple checks, that you get there on the practice squad. Gets a future deal after the year. And then, again, partly due to his play in those spring training camps and a lot of other things, along with Isaiah Rodgers Sr. being suspended for gambling and Stephon Gilmore being traded away, he's emerged as the number one corner on this team. And I know that would, to a lot of people that would say like, oh my gosh, these cornerbacks are going to be awful this year, which again, they very well could be. We're not saying that these young corners are all going to be phenomenal from day one, but I have not seen a moment at all in training camp when I was out there for that week or in any of these preseason games that he's played in where I've said like, oh, he's not ready for this. Like Daryl Baker Jr. is not ready to be an NFL corner. He doesn't look like he deserves to be out there. That has never crossed my mind. He is a long, athletic, explosive corner who has 3 pass breakups in his 2 games played, basically 3 pass breakups in 3 quarters of play in the preseason. Very, very good pass breakups. 2 of them coming on 3rd down, 1 of them coming on a play action pass where he initially bit, he got into perfect position, trailing the receiver and knocked the ball away. I've been really, really impressed. And I don't know if this is a hot take or anything like that, but I think Daryl Baker Jr. is set to have a season like what we saw from like Pierre Desir back in 2018. Where it's just that long, lengthy corner that's just locked down on one side, gets a couple pass breakups, a couple opportune interceptions. I think he's going to be a good outside corner for the Colts this year. I think he's going to be one of the best storylines of the entire year. And I'm feeling really good about Daryl Baker Jr. going into the season. And honestly, like you said, if we're putting surprises and Cinderellas of training camp, this was cornerback 8 coming into the offseason. And now he's cornerback 1 and kind of uncontested quarterback 1. Like Dallas Flowers is obviously the other starter, and Kenny Moore is Kenny Moore, but Darrell Baker Jr. is that guy. And I'm hoping it stays that way throughout the whole season. I think he's in line for a good year, and I'm really excited to see what he can do as a starting corner for the Colts.
Yeah, I really like that you made that connection to Pierre Desir because it kind of feels like that, kind of a journeyman cast off veteran. Like he's been in the league for a bit, hasn't really caught on anywhere, but in the matter of just a month or so has become a mainstay. And I think you've laid out realistic expectations. Like,
Yeah,
I don't think it's hot takey to say that he could be a solid starting corner. You're not saying Pro Bowl or anything, but some interceptions when the ball is there to make a play, not getting constantly victimized in coverage. There'll be some times where he's going to give up something, but overall has been able to stick in guys' hip pockets pretty well. So I really like that one. It's a really good story. When you look at this time last year and Stephon Gilmore was your number 1 outside corner, it just puts in perspective what he's accomplished so far. And I mean, the games have to be played, but just to earn the spot that he has earned, that's a really good story.
Yeah. One thing I want to jump in. One thing I'm really excited about with him is, when it comes to training camp darlings and stuff, and that when we talk about these guys just for training camp, and then they end up playing like 20 snaps throughout the whole season and be practice squad guys, we're going to be talking about Darrell Baker Jr. all season long.
Yeah.
Like this is a guy who's going to get a ton of snaps. So again, I'm just excited to keep talking about this Cinderella story, who again rose from cornerback 8 or 9 all the way up to quarterback 1 throughout all of Colts training camp, and it's well deserved where he's at right now.
Yeah, without a doubt. Moving along to a couple other guys on the other side of the ball. These guys have a wide open door, unfortunately, because of the Ashton Dulin injury, and things are just really not settled at wide receiver right now at the bottom of the depth chart. But Juwan Winfrey has a real shot at making this roster. And, DJ Montgomery is a longer shot for it, but he's done nothing but perform and do it well in these 2 games that he's been with the Colts. So Juwan Winfrey, he's got extensive, a bit of special teams experience already, which is going to be a huge factor because you made a really good point the other day. As wide receiver 5 or 6, it doesn't matter really what you're going to contribute on offense because there's almost no expectations. Mm-hmm. It's almost solely what are you going to do on special teams.
Yeah.
He's been out there practicing as a gunner throughout the summer. He's been pretty solid as a receiver for what it's worth. So that's a name that no one's really mentioning. I think Joel actually had him on his 53-man roster that he put out. I did as well. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, Juwan Winfrey is great to hear about because in camp, you didn't really hear too much. You didn't really see too much in training camp. But whenever he's got out there for those preseason games, you've seen the best of these bottom wide receivers. He's been the best of them. I had a touchdown in game 2 against the Bears, had a couple catches in this most recent game against the Eagles. I think he's earned his spot. Again, it comes down to a lot of semantics and what they want with that last wide receiver spot. But I think he's earned his spot from what he can do on special teams and how he's performed in the preseason for sure.
Yeah, and again, DJ Montgomery, longer shot, but again, if he can play a little bit of special teams, which I think he has a little bit of experience, but again, that'll be the deciding factor. There's got just a tiny bit of time left here, but I'll let you pick between your favorite of the rest of these guys. McTelvin Agim, Jake Funk, Titus Leo, and then some sort of combo of Arlington Hambright and Carter O'Donnell. They've all done really nice things, and I could see a path for each of them to make the roster.
Yeah, I think the most likely one is going to be McTelvin Agim, and it's been great to see his ascension this offseason because McTelvin Agim was a guy where former 5-star recruit going into college, plays pretty well in college but not amazing, but still gets drafted in the 3rd round, top 100 pick by the Denver Broncos. And it just never really panned out with the Broncos. He was more a pass rusher. They already had interior pass rushers that needed more run defense from him. He just wasn't bringing that. He gets cut last season. He sits on free agency for a couple of days. Colts bring him to the practice squad. A futures deal guy comes into training camp, and he's getting run with the ones. He's getting some time with the ones, with DeForest Buckner out with injury, with Grover Stewart taking some rest days. And then throughout all of training camp and preseason, he's been showing that he can rush the passer. I think he's going to finish preseason here with 2.5 sacks. Really, really productive player in the pass rush department. And I think he has a real shot to beat out Taven Bryan as the veteran depth defensive tackle. So McTelvin Agim, I love hearing this because I talked to this guy years ago and I covered him for like a minute there when I covered the Broncos. So I'm a big fan of McTelvin Agim, and I really hope he's the guy who makes it. I mean, again, I like Taven Bryan as well, but I hope he makes it over Taven Bryan.
Yeah, I know Agim has more of a nose tackle's frame, but
Yeah.
in terms of his abilities, I think he still can provide a little bit of what you're looking for in a 3-tech, which is not necessarily what we've seen from Bryan. So if it came head to head between the two of them, Agim has done much more.
Yeah, and Agim's a lot younger too. I think Bryan's like 27, 28, and I want to say that Agim's 24, 25, so a little bit younger there. So we'll see what they do with that. But coming up, guys, we're going to talk about some of the toughest cuts or just the toughest decisions the Colts have to make on this roster before Tuesday's deadline. But first, it takes a little bit of work to look this good, which is why it's a smart choice to rely on Harry's razors to keep your facial hair looking put together. No matter why you shave, Harry's has you covered for the best shave of your life at a price you'll love. From their legendary high-quality razors to skin products like exfoliating face wash and hydrating lotion, Harry's gives you a premium shave without the premium price tag. Get better quality and a better price than any other razors when you get Harry's delivered right to your door. Harry's makes skincare products that will give you the best shave ever. They got creams, washes, and lotions that will keep your skin healthy and hydrated. Their blades are made in their own factory in Germany that stay sharp. Plus, guys who've tried it say their 8th shave is as sharp as their first. Not to mention the sleek, ergonomic, weighted handles that look great in your bathroom and give you precise control with each swipe. Get your best shave ever this summer with Harry's razors and skincare products. Get a $13 starter kit for just $3 at harrys.com/NFL. That's harrys.com/NFL for a $3 starter kit. And everydayers, next week, we're going to be coming off the live streams. We're going to transition back into our season mode. We're going to be posting on YouTube early in the morning at 6 a.m. And the audio, I think, will be a little bit earlier just because that'll be available for you guys at all times there. We're going to go back to our morning schedules. So I know you guys have enjoyed these live streams. We'll still do a little bit of them throughout the season. But for the most part, going back to our morning schedule. So all you everydayers that love the show, make sure you're tuning in to us on wherever you listen to the podcast early in the mornings. All right, Jake, so getting into the toughest cuts or just the toughest decisions that the Colts have to make this offseason, I think the number one player we have to talk about first to start this off is veteran tight end Mo Alley-Cox. Would you agree?
Yes, I would. Let me unmute myself there. But no, I think that's the biggest veteran potential cut that's out there by a wide margin for the Colts. And, he's been with the team for 5 years. He's done some really nice things. And up until this time last year, you thought, okay, this guy could really show something. But, last year, given the opportunity to be the guy, the expectation wasn't that he was going to fully replace Jack Doyle, but, he didn't excel as a pass catcher. He was really like the third pass catching option among the Colts tight ends behind a rookie and a second-year player. And then as a blocker, which was supposed to be, where his bread is buttered, didn't really excel there either. So now looking forward, I just don't really see where he fits in because this is a franchise that's going young. They're trying to invest snaps and things in these young players. And this is one of the younger groups on the roster. So how does he fit in there against guys like Jelani Woods and Kylan Granson, who you're almost certain, like gun to your head, they're making the roster. You could really say the same thing about Drew Ogletree, pretty close. So it comes down to, do you just put Mo Alley-Cox in there just because you know what he can do, or do you go with a guy like Will Mallory, who is more of a projection, but you drafted him for a reason? He's a potential playmaker. And, I think it all comes down to whether or not they think they have adequate blockers among that group. But in general, I mean, it's tough. He's done some nice things. I just don't know how Alley-Cox fits into this future.
Yeah, Jake, I'm going to ask you to do something here while I'm about to go on a spiel. Pull up Spotrac and see what's left on Mo Alley-Cox's contract if a team were to trade for him. And while you look that up, I'll continue talking here so I can distract the viewers with my lovely voice.
I want to say it's like $1.5 million, but I'm going to confirm.
Yeah, you can look at that real quick. But I think Mo Alley-Cox is one of the Colts' prime trade candidates this offseason. I'm not saying that they're going to get much for him, like maybe like a conditional 7th or one of those 6 for 7th trade swap type things. So I don't think it's going to be anything crazy. But I think there are going to be teams around the league that are going to look at this and say, hey, we can get a veteran tight end with potentially not much left on his contract, and they can get him as like their tight end 3 or 4. Because on the Colts, really, again, they're going young. This new staff has no ties to him whatsoever, outside of Tom Manning coaching him a couple years ago. But at the end of the day, how much is Tom Manning's voice going to be in this when it comes down to all these young players? And Will Mallory is a player who I think the Colts are 100% sure he's not going to make it through waivers. They are pretty confident that he could not get through waivers, so he's going to make this team. And are you going to keep 5 tight ends? Probably not. So I think Mo Alley-Cox is the odd man out, and he'll either get outright cut or a team will take him on for like conditional 7th with some playing time stuff. And the Colts can move off that contract. But do you have the contract pulled up there, Jake? How much is left on it?
Yeah, I do. So this is the last year of his deal. The cap hit in total is 5.3 mil. Dead cap is 2.39. So you're looking at about a savings of 2.9 and a little of change if you move that move that contract off the books.
Yeah, it's really not that important for the Colts to save money on this. Like, it's really not like a money saving deal. It's more of just inherit, like somebody else taking that player from you because you can get maybe something for it. So the other team would take like $2.5 million on him. Like, that's fine for a tight end 3. I think he's one of the prime trade options alongside potentially Taven Bryan, who we can kind of transition to next. Veteran defensive tackle Taven Bryan was brought in to be that third DT this offseason, a player that could rush the passer, play a little bit on rundowns. Again, like a 27-year-old veteran defensive tackle, former first-round pick that you want to be your rotational guy behind the top 2. And he's been outplayed by McTelvin Agim, and they like Eric Johnson Adetomi a lot better than him. So do you keep him over McTelvin Agim despite Agim having a better camp? Or do you just go, do you just cut him? Do you trade him? Like, what do you do with that contract there? I think if the Colts are going to make any player trades where they're moving players off the roster before Tuesday, obviously Jonathan Taylor is the number one there, but Taven Bryan and Mo Alley-Cox, I think, are 2 guys that they could maybe get conditional 7ths for, or like low-end contracts, if not just outright releasing those 2. Because I just don't know if those 2 are going to make the roster when I look at the whole 53-man right now.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And as much as I'm leaning towards Mo, not being a part of the future plans, I kind of feel even stronger about Taven Bryan because, I mean, at least with Mo not showing anything this summer, he has the excuse of he's been hurt most of the time. Taven Bryan's been out there the whole time and has got a lot of run with the ones with DeForest Buckner out. I have nothing to say. You know what I mean? Like, I have things to say about McTelvin Agim. I have things to say about Adetomi Adebawore. Like, I just don't really have anything to say about him.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say with that is I do know that Adetomi, well, I don't want to say I do know. I feel very confident predicting Adetomi and Eric Johnson are going to make the team.
Yeah, same here.
So it's whether they keep a 5th defensive tackle. And is that 5th defensive tackle going to be Agim, who they think they can probably get to the practice squad, or Taven Bryan, or do they just not keep that 5th one there? So Bryan could be out either way, and Agim might not factor into this. But I do think that they have 4 defensive tackles they like, and I just don't know if Taven Bryan factors into that.
Yeah, I totally agree. So looking beyond the line, there are a couple of defensive backs that have a really compelling argument to make the roster. I think they're safer bets for the roster, but you never know. Like, they could be on the chopping block as well. Darius Rush and Tony Brown. So Tony Brown being cut would kind of be a victim of keeping Rush, I would say. Really vice versa, because it's a numbers game at corner. Like, do you keep all 7 guys? So for Brown, you've talked pretty extensively about, yes, he's your backup nickel, but you could probably be safe moving him to the practice squad and then just bringing him in as necessary throughout the season. Darius Rush, that's just a tough one because it's a young guy with a ton of upside, a lot of athleticism, but has definitely fallen behind Jalen Jones and doesn't have the draft pedigree of being a 2nd-round pick like Juju Brents does.
Yeah, Darius Rush is not going to get cut. Like, I feel pretty good saying that. Like, you just can't cut that potential that you have in him. But it comes down to, do they keep 6 or 7 corners? Like, do they keep Tony Brown on the initial? I think ultimately what they're going to do with Tony Brown is do what they did with Phillip Lindsay last year, where Phillip Lindsay didn't make the initial 53, but then after they did some roster configuration, he was back on the 53 going into week 1. And because you can do that with a veteran player because you can cut them without them going through waivers. So I think Tony Brown is a player where you cut him, but then you're on the phone with him and you're like, hey, don't leave town. Like, don't worry. Don't worry. You're not actually cut. You're fake cut. You're coming right back. We just need to cut you to make way for these other ones. We'll give you the same contract. Don't worry. Like, you're fine. I think that's what it's going to be with Tony Brown, where it's like they'll cut him and he might go to the practice squad, but I think they'll cut him, make some roster moves, make some things switched around, and then bring him back to the 53-man roster going into week 1, and they'll have 7 corners on the roster. So I don't think he's like, when it comes to these two players, I don't think either of them are technically like roster cuts, but Tony Brown probably will get cut and then get brought back like the next day.
Yeah, I as much as I would like to see them just hang on to 7 corners, I do see some sort of maneuvering. Plus, you never know. Chris Ballard loves to tinker with cornerbacks, and he might bring in a guy or two. So we'll just see about that. We're actually going to go on and discuss some guys across the league that make a lot of sense for the Colts to bring in after they make their own cuts. But first, we want to talk fantasy. August is here, and you know what that means. The official start of fantasy football draft month. Get championship ready for your home league by trying out Best Ball on Underdog Fantasy. It's a nice newer format that people are trying over the last few years, and a lot of people really like it. All you do is one live snake draft, no waivers, no trades. Underdog sets your best ball lineup every week. You just try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania tournament. The largest fantasy football contest of all time is back, and even bigger, with $15 million of total prizes up for grabs, including an absurd $3 million going to the winner. Last year, the winner of the whole thing drafted their team in July, so don't wait around. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code LOCKEDON to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code LOCKEDON. All right, so now, as we all know, especially this year, I think pretty heavily, it's going to be a waiver wire year. There's going to be free agents and guys off the waiver wire that the Colts bring in to continue trying to mold this young roster and get it to where they want, because there's just some really thin spots on this roster. So it's inevitable there's going to be at least a few guys brought in from outside. And, you know, you've got positions like running back and tight end have been heavily churned throughout training camp. You know, wide receiver is another area that makes a lot of sense. But Zach and I are in agreement. The most dire spot is the interior of the offensive line. So, Zach, you know, all these positions considered, who are some of your favorite potential cuts from the outside that make a lot of sense? You're on mute.
That we're live. Sorry about that. But
showbiz, baby.
Before we get into the interior offensive line, though, Jake, because I know we want to talk about interior offensive line. That's where most of this conversation is going to be. We have to talk about the one signing that's almost certainly going to happen before cutdown day, and that is in correlation with the Jonathan Taylor trade. I don't know if a Jonathan Taylor trade is actually going to materialize and actually happen, but I feel like at this juncture, we can say Jonathan Taylor is most likely not going to play with the Colts next year, no matter what it is. Even if he doesn't get traded, he'll be on the PUP for the entire year and just won't play. So I'm not going to say it's like 100% happening, but it feels like Kareem Hunt is almost certainly going to be signed to this Colts roster next week or sometime next week. I don't know if he'll be the starting running back, but from everything that I've heard and some other people have heard, like I think Kareem Hunt's probably going to be signed to this Colts team next week. And again, if a trade happens, it's 100% going to happen. If a trade doesn't happen, maybe a little bit less, but I still think Kareem Hunt's going to be added to this team. So if we're looking at one outside player to add to this roster, that's probably going to happen. It's probably going to be Kareem Hunt. And Kareem Hunt, you know, we kind of avoid talking about him on this show for reasons, but Kareem Hunt, a player last year who averaged 3.8 yards per carry on 123 carries, definitely lost a step, does not really have the acceleration or the burst that he once had with the Kansas City Chiefs or even in earlier years with the Cleveland Browns. Still a decent little pass catcher and still a bigger back that's hard to tackle, but, you know, he can still do something, I guess, for you. It's just he's not Kareem Hunt. When you see the name Kareem Hunt, that's not him anymore. It's veteran running back who is kind of a plotter. That's kind of what the Colts would be adding there. But before we get to the interior offensive line there, Jake, I did want to hit that like Kareem Hunt signing is probably going to happen for the Colts.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's such a running back by committee move because, I mean, he just fits right in with Evan Hull and Deion Jackson, both of whom have more juice left than he does. But like, I mean, not many guys in the league have the pizzazz that Jonathan Taylor does, but that move doesn't really move the needle much. You're not getting like a home run hitter or anything. He's just not drastically different from what they already have, especially like Zach Moss. He's basically Zach Moss.
Yeah, he's not as efficient as Moss was last year, but yeah, I see where you're going with that. Like, they're just not home run hitters. They're just plotters.
You've got a bunch of guys who can run a little bit between the tackles and catch the ball a bit.
Yeah. But let's transition to interior offensive line and just offensive line in general, because I do think the Colts are going to be very active in adding offensive linemen to this depth chart. And a big part of that now is the Danny Pinter injury. We don't know how serious it's going to be. I'd be shocked if it's anything less than a high ankle sprain. And Jake's probably checking the news right now. I'm sure that somebody's dropping something.
My phone vibrated. I was like, I know it's coming through while we're going to talk about it.
Yeah. So it's probably something in there, a Danny Pinter like injury update. But I'd be shocked if it's anything less than a high ankle sprain, which would be like a 6 to 7, 8 week injury, whatever that is there. It varies for a lot of guys. Worst case, it's like a broken ankle and he's out for the entire year. But even before that Danny Pinter injury, the Colts needed more offensive linemen. Like we've been saying on the show, they have 7 rosterable guys with the starting 5, Danny Pinter and Blake Freeland. You could throw someone like Carter O'Donnell in there or Arlington Hambright, but you don't feel good if those guys make the roster. You're not feeling very good with those guys being starters. So there's a couple of quality linemen out there that I think the Colts could pursue. Backup center Nick Harris for the Cleveland Browns is going to get beat out by Luke Whippler, their 6th-round draft pick out of Ohio State. Nick Harris is a former Washington Husky, very used to the Chris Strasser, like aggressive set type blocking player that really could get in there. I think the Colts will probably have to trade like a late-round pick for him, but honestly, he'd probably be an upgrade over Danny Pinter, even at backup center. 2 interior offensive linemen I've been really impressed with from the Buffalo Bills, Nick Broker and Alec Anderson. I think they're both rookies or second-year players. I want to say Broker is a rookie and Anderson is a second-year player. You guys can correct me on that in the comment section.
If they want to send Osiris Torrance instead, that is okay.
Yeah, that's true. They can send Osiris Torrance as well. Ben Cleveland looks like he might be cut from the Baltimore Ravens. That could be a really interesting one out of the former Georgia offensive lineman who's like 340 pounds. And then if you want more of a veteran type player, Royce Newman from the Green Bay Packers, kind of a tackle guard switch guy who started, I think, 22 games the last 2 years for the Packers. It looks like they're going to go a little bit younger at those positions with Sean Ryan kind of stepping up. So, again, this is where that 4th waiver wire spot kind of plays for the Colts, where they could claim someone with that 4th spot and then also trade a late round pick for another interior offensive lineman and really solidify that group. One more I want to throw in there too is, if Chris Reed gets cut by the Vikings, if Chris Reed gets cut by the Vikings, I'm all for it. I know he's a little bit older and he didn't really play it all last year, but hey, if Chris Reed gets cut, there we go. Let's do it.
That's always a guy. And a name that always comes up is Dalton Reisner, which does make sense, but an established veteran like that, who I believe has had some injuries, there's got to be a reason why he's still available. Like, we're essentially knocking on the door of week 1 right now. I don't know what it is personally, whether it's medicals or like his asking price or whatever it is. There's got to be a reason. And like, I'm sure the Colts have investigated, he's a high level free agent. So the Colts have looked at it, I'm sure. I don't know to what level. But if they like it, maybe they'll go for it. If not, I mean, again, there's reasons all 32 teams have allowed him to still be out there.
Yeah. And then one more player I want to throw in here, because again, we don't know what's going to happen with this Colts wide receiver room. We don't know if any of these guys on the roster are going to be that 5th wide receiver or if they're going to find one on the waiver wire. But Tim Jones from the Jacksonville Jaguars, super athletic player who was a free agent or an undrafted free agent last year, big time special teamer, very Ashton Dulin-like, where he can play gunner and play all 4 teams, really high level athleticism. I think so far in the preseason, he only has 1 catch, but it was for like a 50-yard gain. He's had a really strong camp with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They just have a lot of wide receivers on that depth chart that they just don't know what to do with. So Tim Jones, I wouldn't be opposed to grabbing as that fifth, like Ashton Dulin type player. So keep an eye on him for sure. But I do think the Colts are going to make some changes to this interior offensive line through their waiver wires. I think they're going to be looking at wide receiver and maybe looking at running back again. I think a Kareem Hunt signing is likely, but they could look at some other waiver wire options there. There's a lot of roster moves this Colts team is still going to make. And we have until Tuesday. They're going to make a ton of moves. And obviously, we didn't even talk about the big one, which is the Jonathan Taylor trade that could happen. So there's going to be a lot of moves coming from the Indianapolis Colts here in the next couple of days.
Yeah, that's the next big shoe to drop. Honestly, when it comes to like wide receiver, I don't even think I'm going to care what their pedigree as on offense. Like, how good are you on special teams? Because that's the shoes you fill with Ashton Dulin. But yeah, other than that, guys, remember 53-man roster. It's going to be announced, but do not put that in stone because probably within an hour or two, there will be new names coming on it.
Yeah, Andre Sacheri, I remember a couple years ago, we all got really excited that he made the 53, and he got cut like a minute later for waiver claims. And he ended up playing pretty well for the Eagles there. I think he went to the Super Bowl with them last year. But Everydayers, that is all we have for today. We'll be back with you guys on Monday morning to talk about last minute roster things and everything the Colts done. I'm sure they're going to bring a lot of news to us here over the weekend. So we'll talk all about that on the Monday morning show. And if you don't already, follow at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter/X. Also subscribe to Locked On Colts podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'd love your guys' ratings and reviews. And we'll see you guys back here bright and early Monday morning.